Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1030 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. But now that you have, let's begin. Whew, okay, alright. Prepare yourself. Everything's okay, guys. Everything's okay. I'm not gonna lie, alright? So a thing happened, which I didn't predict, nor really want that much, nor did many other people. So it was definitely going to be controversial, but this might have been the perfect chapter to drop something like that because the whole chapter was really, really good. So I guess we'll start off with that because, you know, that's what everyone wants to talk about. In this case, I'm just preparing you guys. In this case, I would say that my opinion is pretty nuanced, or at least very of my own mind, and so it's unlikely that basically anyone is going to agree with me. But I will try. Pray for me. I liked the Kinemon stuff in this chapter. Totally unapologetically, for a couple reasons. But first, let's begin with the criticism. This has been an ongoing critique of One Piece that I have essentially agreed with at every step of the way. JB doesn't criticize One Piece. False, because this is a thing in particular that I have repeatedly criticized, which is that the characters don't die. And when characters don't die, but Oda sets up those moments, if you constantly fake people out, it becomes hard to believe those moments in the moment that they happen. This has certainly been the case for me. Although some might say that my own personal delusion sort of helps buffer this on several occasions, when I believe in death despite all evidence pointing otherwise. I would say that the best evidences of this were in Whole Cake Island. First off, context is important. We've gone through essentially the entire story of One Piece, and for the vast majority of it, unless the character's death was absolutely crucial to the main character or characters or the plot of the story, characters don't die. This has happened repeatedly where Oda tries to give us situations in which he is trying to make us believe that a character has died, such as Pell, such as Bellamy, or Bon Clay, or Law, and they come back to life. And so this all came to head for me in Whole Cake Island, where at that point in the story, I was absolutely and totally convinced that unless a death was absolutely crucial, that even if it seemed as though the character had died, that they had. So when Pedro died, or when Pound died, I lost something in these moments. I couldn't really buy the moments fully. I was taken out of the context of the story, where I should have felt like pain and or drama. Instead, I was thinking, well, how are they going to come back? Which has its own form of entertainment and enjoyment attached to it, but, you know, not in the sense of enjoying the story for what Oda is trying to convey. And so with Pound, this was absolutely right. However, we're in Wano now. And as for right now, my opinion about Pedro has drastically changed, where in the moment I couldn't believe in it, but now I do. And Oda's helped that with other deaths that we have seen in Wano, such as Yasu, and my belief based on the trajectory of the story and some of the things that Oda was doing, that more deaths were coming. And I very much had a moment of validation when this seemed to start actually taking place, where we are in the middle of the raid and Shootenmaru and Kinemon and Kiku and Kandro all had very convincing deaths. So the sequence of events is after a very long period of time of not believing in these moments, which I think does add something to the story. Finally, I start to believe, and then finally I start to feel validated and totally convinced. Okay, there can be some serious casualties, serious consequences, which helps me immerse in the story and really feel the stakes. But I want to make sure that I say this. Deaths are not necessary for everyone. This is not something that everyone wants, nor what everyone needs in order to enjoy these moments. Talking about personal subjective things, this is one of those. For me to buy a death, I have to believe that I'm not definitely going to get faked out. So fake outs for me are not inherently bad. Like for instance, Hyo had a fake out during the raid. That to me is not inherently bad. I just need to have the ability to believe that it is possible so that I can fully immerse into the moment. So I think that it goes without saying that what we got in this chapter were Kiku, Kanjuro, and Kinemon all are not dead, in fact alive. Kinemon being very alive is definitely the opposite of what I wanted. Although it's worth noting that the upper half of his body still has not moved, which is interesting. Not that I actually want these characters to die as I'm immersed in the story, because I personally really love Kinemon. I love Kinemon a lot. I like Kiku, and Kanjuro is a villain, so kill him. But for the sake of the ebb and flow of the story, getting into it, feeling it, deaths, I think, for me, are a necessary evil. But as I said, guys, fake outs are not inherently bad. I do not think that they are inherently bad. So right now, I'm kind of hanging by a string of Pedro. Pedro represents, to me, a non-essential, significant character death. Right, Oda can make Pedro's death significant or not, but unlike Whitebeard, the changing of the guard, or Ace, Luffy's brother, Oda has to create a reason why Pedro's death is significant for the story. So in this respect, it is a non-essential death. The story could have carried on without it, easily, and very little would have been lost. And for me, Pedro is more significant than a character such as Yasu, because I never got the impression that Yasu would continue in the story past Wano. He wasn't going to travel with the Strats, where Pedro could have. Or at least he could have joined the Grand Fleet, something to that effect. So that made it a more significant death. Notwithstanding that I think that it would have, should have, and did affect the Strats as a whole more than Yasu. Because the Strats at least can be blamed in part for Pedro's death rather than Yasu. Can't really blame the Strats for Yasu. I don't get the impression that the Strats in any way led Yasu to his death. So to reiterate, Pedro represents to me a non-essential, significant death. I hope you guys understand. So now I'm holding by a string of Pedro. Some people might say that I foolishly believe that Pedro is actually dead, and that at some point in time he's just going to appear alive. These people might be right. Certainly there is a lot of precedent for such a thing occurring, including this chapter. I might be totally, absolutely deluded. And I suspect that many people might say this, and valid. But I can't actually change how I feel. And I feel as though Pedro is dead. So if he can die, others can. So I do still have the ability to believe. And that's all that's really required, because as long as I have doubts, then I can immerse myself, because I'm not sure. I can think about, well, are they dead or not? But in the moment, it's possible. It really mainly depends on whether or not I can conceive of how Oda might use that death to impact the story or the characters in the story. So this leads to what I actually think. I think that all these characters coming back to life in this chapter is the fake out, because I do actually think that deaths are still coming. In fact, I think that these characters' deaths are still coming. Kanjuro, Kiku, and Kinemon, for sure. Although, just like a random thought, right? We don't know how Law's fruit works, but with the upper half of Kinemon's body seemingly dying, where the lower half seems just fine, it's like, what if the upper half of Kinemon dies, but the lower half doesn't? So the lower half joins the crew and he just sticks onto the ship and just poots and, That's so messed up. That thought occurred to me. You're welcome. But yeah, back to serious mode. This leads to another different criticism. I've noticed this a lot with Oda recently, but Oda really does not like having the community predict what he will do. And it's becoming more apparent to me over time. There's been like little nuggets in interviews, either from Oda or his editors, like a joke or not, that when they see a theory that is correct, they change the story. I don't know if that actually happens, but if it does, that is a bad idea in my opinion. George R.R. Martin, the author of A Game of Thrones or Song of Ice and Fire, has talked about this at length. And basically, there was an early stage where the internet was just dawning, and he was writing A Game of Thrones, and he was lurked on forums that speculated about his book, and when he saw that people were guessing correctly things that would happen, he was very compelled to change the story so that the element of surprise would still exist. But George R.R. Martin came to the conclusion that that was a bad idea, and that it was more important for him to sort of tune it out and write his story. And this is something that I definitely agree with. Because a lot of these moments that people are speculating are, first off, important moments in the story, moments that have been foreshadowed throughout and intended to be some of the biggest things that happen. Certainly it's possible to alter it in a way that it would be equally satisfying, but the challenge is very difficult, and I think that it's more likely that an author fails than succeeds. So you make your story lesser than by being reactionary to the people that are following it as it is created. So while it is important to some degree to keep in mind maybe what fans are speculating, you've got to balance what is essentially important to keep. And I think that I understand this a little bit better than most because of, how deeply entrenched I am in the theory community. I understand that even as a theory is correct, there's still enjoyment from the reveal, still surprise even in the reveal, just because you aren't completely sure if your theory is correct. There's reward in that. But I can also see how an author wants everyone to be surprised. This wasn't a problem before the internet, right? But the internet, we share things publicly. So I have a thought, the community has a thought, and then it's just prevalent everywhere. Just honestly, guys, this is probably more than anything what would make me stop making theories on YouTube. Even though I don't believe that it's right, if I believe that Oda pretty much changes everything based on community and to the point in which he is willing to ruin his own story, at that point what I'm doing is definitely a problem. I'm not at that point yet, but it's definitely on my mind. While I may not agree if that is Oda's philosophy and I have effect on the story, then that's definitely a tough one. It helps when we have like last chapter, for instance, where the prevalent community theory was that Killer was going to attack Hawkins where Kid was missing his arm. That was everywhere. That was a community theory, and Oda still did it. He didn't change it despite having the potential and likely having known that people expected it. Every time that happens, I sort of wipe my forehead like, okay, cool. Because it was still an awesome moment. Not to segue too hard, but really I think this comes down to weekly experience versus binging experience. Oda has to try to appeal to both. And so in the weekly experience, you have more time to think about it. So some things that you would miss if you binged, you catch in weekly. Particularly with an entire community of minds to draw from. And for some people, this definitely ruins the experience for them. Not for me personally, but for some people, it's definitely true. This is another sort of fair, subjective experience because the way that you consume the story affects how good or how quality you think it is. Because the idea of a payoff is subjective. Whether you feel paid off or not is subjective. But anyway, to get back to the point, I think that there's definitely some potential that Oda does fiddle with the story a little bit, or at least tries too hard in order to shake people off his trail. I've noticed this a lot recently, like with Sanji, for instance. Who is Sanji going to fight? Oda took Sanji on this long, winding journey. Like, is he gonna fight Jack? Is he gonna fight Queen? Is he gonna fight King? No, it's Black Maria. Oh no, wait, it was actually Queen, the most prevalent speculation from the start of the arc. There's all these things that Oda suggests as a possibility so that we don't know. Because Oda really values the idea, the element of surprise, and weighs that pretty highly. Instances in which I think that this was handled poorly, that I personally didn't enjoy, and many others as well, is the final season of Game of Thrones, right? Who is actually going to sit on the throne? And the creators of the show knew all the various speculations, which ones were most prevalent or not, and they pretty much chose at random, as it appears to me. They didn't choose the options that seemed most set up, most satisfying, most foreshadowing. They picked the most surprising, probably. And the general response that I saw was that fans were definitely surprised, but left feeling unfulfilled. Oda takes a different tact, where he's like, everyone is guessing Queen. He knows that probably his editors are aware of what the community thinks is most likely, so then he takes it upon himself to try and dissuade us of this notion just before the actual fight starts. The fans strongly believe that this is going to happen, so I'm going to make them strongly believe in something else, and then it happens. And I have a theory about how he could pay all of this off eventually. But I do think that for a lot of people it gets to be a little bit too much. For most people, they actually get what they want in the end, but it doesn't change the journey being convoluted and, especially in retrospect, very slogging. Eventually, I both saw and experienced a fan reaction, which was essentially, I'm exhausted. I have no idea who Sanji is going to fight, and I'm finding myself caring less. And the same thing could be true with deaths. Is a character going to die or not? Oda doesn't want you to know, so he starts including information, misdirecting, taking you back and forth, shaking you off the trail, so that you're just left kind of bewildered. I think that's the objective. But at the same time, the fan experience can be, well, I don't know if Kandro and Kiku and Kinemon are going to die or not, and I'm finding myself caring less. And that's not really what you want. So Oda has in his mind maybe this powerful scene, this final scene where Kinemon does actually finally die, but the long slogging journey, the twists and turns, the fake outs, have fans feeling like, well, finally. Totally not immersed in the moment. The great payoff undone by the progress. For some people. I definitely worry about this. If you guys want another recent example of this where I felt like a lot of the community reaction was related to this was Pudding, right? Whereas Pudding, friend or foe, is she good or evil? The ultimate payoff moment of all of Whole Cake Island for Pudding was her kiss, right? With Sanji. Oda was constantly trying to shake people off the trail of like, is she good? Is she an ally? Is she not? And so some people divested, and or their enjoyment was lessened. But to sort of restate and come to a conclusion here, I did enjoy this chapter. I am totally fine with Kinemon coming back. I have some concerns which I just iterated to you, but I'm hopeful that Oda has a powerful moment. And I also think that it's worth noting the creativity in which Oda brought Kinemon back to life. That actually makes a big difference for me. I mean, everyone's like, right, there is no way Kinemon survived this. There is no way. And Oda's like, challenge accepted. And I think in this case, he nailed it. I really do believe that. At least for me, there is a huge difference between a fake out like Pell, right? Where Pell takes the bomb up above Alabasta, it explodes, you assume Pell is dead, and then he just kind of shows up later and you're like, oh, he just survived a nuke. The element of believability is not particularly high. But when Kinemon is cut in half or cut directly in the middle, and then he survives because of a thing that was present and prevalent in the story earlier, used in an interesting and different and unexpected way, that was quite honestly very, very funny. You get points for that. I honestly could not stop laughing all of Kinemon in this chapter because of Poot and remembering like he's talking with farts. It is so absurd and so quintessential One Piece. There's just something about that. All the way from back in Punk Hazard, I totally forgot the feeling that I got reading Punk Hazard. It almost filled me with more joy. And I just want to remind you guys, alright, this is Oda's MO. For a joke, many things might be sacrificed. That is just, if it's a great joke, if he thinks that it's hilarious, he will jump over or through whatever hoops are present to make it happen. That is just who Oda is. And I actually think that it's because of this that often when jokes aren't funny to you, if you read this and you didn't think that it was funny, your enjoyment of the idea of it itself is significantly less. Oda sacrifices things for the joke. So the intention is, how Oda probably experiences it himself, is that the joke is more important than these other things. It leaves him with the feeling that he wants. So if you don't get that feeling, all you're left with is the sacrifice. In this case, the sacrifice of the previous scene with Kinemon that was really dramatic, that you're now thinking is like fake news. But anyway, let's go to the beginning of the chapter. We start this chapter with the scene of Apu and X-Drake and the numbers we have been waiting so long to finally reveal themselves. And talking about fake outs or choosing the surprising route. It appears that Apu is trying to convince X-Drake to join an alliance with him to sort of take out whoever survives this war. This was actually a theme within the chapter because we pan to CP0 later and they basically say the same thing, that both the Alliance and Kaido are losing and opening themselves up to be crushed. The winner of this fight will lose after it's over. That's the idea that Oda is now planting in our brain. One that we've been speculating obviously for a while, which I'm really excited for. Like the idea of it, how it might play out, the drama and everything about that is very, very exciting to me. You guys know Morge has gone on and on and on and on about the raid failing. And so the idea of the raid, the actual plan of the raid was to take down Kaido. And so if Kaido actually goes down, the raid won't fail. But at the same time, the overarching goal of all of this was to save Wano, right? And open the borders and protect all of its people. So it's theoretically possible that they defeat Kaido, thus the raid doesn't technically end in failure, but it really does. There's just so many possibilities. The complexity of this arc is quite honestly staggering. I'm really curious if X-Drake would actually join an alliance with Apu seriously, right? Another theme of Wano is betrayals. So X-Drake could technically agree, but we also know that he's a member of SWORD, so he could say, hey Apu, I'm on your side, we'll take out whoever wins, but then also betray him, which is kind of what I'm expecting. In addition, this would also be a betrayal because X-Drake is currently in an alliance with the Straw Hats, so once again, I thought it was really interesting and unexpected that Apu figured out that X-Drake was a planted Marine. I didn't really think of Apu as that smart of a character. Now, how he came to this conclusion, your guess is as good as mine because he just kind of threw it out there. I'm not sure if it makes sense or not because we kind of missed the lead up to this. But I'm really excited about the dynamic, especially since we don't know what X-Drake's plan is, how X-Drake's faction might find their way to this some way, somehow. Also, Apu probably doesn't know what CP0 is going to do or that CP0 is on the way. How would that change his perspective? Again, it's just really complicated, but exciting. But we're not done with this scene. Finally, we get introduced to the numbers, which is funny because on Twitter, somebody recently asked me about numbers 1, 2, and 3, and I basically said this: I'm not sure if I care about them, because the numbers were made to be a big deal earlier, we weren't sure what role they would play, and then so far, it's like, the idea of them is cool, I like the backstory for the numbers, but what is the actual role they'll play in the fight, particularly ones that weren't introduced yet? I didn't know. And literally like 4 or 5 days later, Oda's like, here you go, JB. And it's really fitting, because we've talked about this from very near the start of the raid, but Kaido's crew is held together by very tentative threads, most probably because of the way that Kaido rules, the way that he is a leader. We saw earlier where Queen was willing to essentially sacrifice the majority of the crew on the life floor with his virus. One way in which Kaido and Big Mom are very different is Kaido does actually encourage ambition. Another example of this was with the Flying Six, right? Like, if you go get Yamato, then one of you will have an opportunity to fight one of the headliners, potentially becoming one. All the ranks within Kaido's crew can be earned, with the exception of Kaido's role as captain, simply because Kaido is too strong. But he encouraged this mentality, so as the Straw Hats and as the Alliance slowly bring Kaido down and weaken him, of course there's going to be members of Kaido's crew that see the opportunity. So this moment with the numbers absolutely makes sense. Apu makes even more sense than this. This was something that was very heavily set up from Queen and Apu's interactions. Basically, Queen's like, we don't care about you anymore, time to die. So this was a theory that essentially we called, maybe not Apu teaming up with X-Drake, but Apu turning against Kaido. Yeah, I think that we actually theorized that Apu would join the Alliance, but this is even better. Once again, man, sometimes I just want to say it every time, like, Oda, 20 years into the game, is still so creative. He's trying, and I appreciate that so much. It would have been so easy to have Apu join the Alliance, but Oda took the time to think about it and came up with something that I think is better. But anyway, the crazy theory going around social media right now that I saw on Twitter from a user named Nido basically compared the numbers 1, 2, and 3 to the samurai that we saw in Yamato's flashback and Zoro's father, probably. The resemblance is there. You guys know I don't put images from the panel on these videos, but look at the numbers and then look at the samurai from Yamato's flashback. It's everywhere on social media. And I just want to say, I hope this is true, because it has me floored. It is mind blowing. I don't know how Oda will take it or if it's possible, but if it happens, it would be just mind blowing. The only thing that really comes to my mind, maybe, is if Kaido captured these samurai and rather than kill them, sent them to the world government to be experimented on. But then the other question is that the numbers don't seem to have the personality of the samurai, the honor. So are they, as people, totally changed? Is this just visual similarities? This also reminds me of the theory that agents of Cypherpole look a lot like the children from Big Mom's flashback from the orphanage. All of these things are really cool, and I'm curious as if they are what, people theorize. Certainly not definitive, but the wow factor, if it was, is just astronomically high. Even the things that the numbers say are intriguing to me. I'll obviously wait for the official translation here, because this is the kind of thing that might be mistranslated, but they say opportunities like this only come around once in a lifetime, which is just like, it feels ominous. Do you guys feel the ominousness of what they're saying? I always want to speculate that they've had more than one lifetime. Maybe that'll somehow relate to the numbers being world government experiments. Also, Blackbeard comes to mind, I'm just saying. Man doesn't sleep. But yeah, as we talked about earlier, Chondro is still technically alive. That man has some serious life force. But Orochi contacts him somehow and orders him to create a fire spirit, which was very cool. There's like so much disinformation going on from Oda's part, right? It's like there's so many ways in which catastrophe could happen. The island could fall, or the island could blow up, or if it doesn't blow up, maybe just everyone dies from the fire itself. I feel as though you have to choose. It's difficult to believe that multiple things will happen. Either the island blows up, or it falls, or it doesn't. You're kind of locked into one of those three pathways. But I'm curious how Oda handles all this. I'm definitely starting to feel the tension of the island itself, the stakes, Yamato and Momonosuke. It's going down. Now, how would I feel if they stop the fire, the island doesn't blow up, nor does it fall? I'm not sure. I hate being against winning, but I just have this reoccurring thought that the best moments in all of One Piece is when Oda breaks the cycle. Luffy always saves his friends. He always saves his friends. So he goes to save Ace, and you almost take it for granted a little bit. Like, of course he's going to save Ace. And then he doesn't, and it's one of the most powerful moments in the story. Simultaneously, Luffy always wins his fights and gets away without any consequences. This is throughout the entire story until the pattern breaks. And then you get Sabaody, which is, again, one of the best moments in the entire story. Another thing that is similar to this is that every island that Luffy has ever gone to that has needed to be saved, he has saved it. The only times that I would speculate that Luffy truly lost was Marineford and Sabaody, but those weren't islands that need saved. So will that pattern eventually break? Will Wano be the first island that the Strats don't save? Think about it in this way. How brutal would it be if what it means to open the borders of Wano becomes Wano itself is destroyed and has no borders? I mean, right? I picture all the residents of Wano that Oda has taken a lot of time to flesh out. You know what they dream of, you know what they want, their struggles, and to take that away from them and leave them with nothing. They lose everything in this fight. Whew. The thought of it makes me shiver. So I definitely want that. I probably want it so much that it'll be difficult to manage my expectations. or my feelings if it doesn't happen. But the chapter wasn't done giving. We got the end of the chapter focused on Law, Kid, and Big Mom's fight. And man, Law and Kid did work. Oda revealed awakenings. The end of this chapter has just as much conversation as all of the chapter before now. First off, I definitely need help understanding Law's awakening. I could probably throw a lot of words at you guys to try and understand exactly what's going on, but I don't feel like I understand. That's just the honest truth. I don't feel like I understand. I want an explanation. I'm sure everybody knows this, but anesthesia is like what they give you when you go to the dentist, and the purpose of it is to manage pain. It numbs your body or a particular part of your body so that you don't feel whatever is, the surgery or whatever. Law says the incision is harmless, but Kroom influences your body in other ways. We're going to come back to this because it's mysterious. And then Law's ability created a shockwave which made Mama bleed. Bear in mind that the whole mythos of Big Mom from Whole Cake Island is that she had never bled before other than with the portrait of Mother Carmel. So Law's awakening did something next level. I have to assume that Law removed her invulnerability, however that works. We still don't know why Big Mom is invulnerable, but from the context of what happens after this, where Kid awakens his fruit and then turns Big Mom into a magnet and all of that metal come towards her, and under normal circumstances, that wouldn't do anything to her. But we have to believe, we haven't seen it, but we have to believe something's got to happen, right? Kid's awakening has to do something, so that's what I'm assuming. Law removed her invulnerability, and then Kid's awakening is doing actual damage to her. So here are some of my musings that I want to throw out into the vacuum. First off, I have before at length compared or discussed how Law's fruit might be similar to or relate to Big Mom's fruit. Law's fruit essentially gives him total control over an area and people's bodies as well within that area. But a kind of running theory that I have is that Oda separates people out into various parts, where you have the body, which is the vessel, you have the actual soul of the person, and then a person's shadow. All three of these things sort of coexist. So for instance, in a character like Brook, right, his body is a vessel. It's not actually alive, but as long as the soul inhabits the body, whether or not it's alive, then the person becomes alive. The same thing is also shown through Big Mom's abilities. Big Mom can take people's soul and give it to bodies that would not normally be alive, and they live. And we're not going to talk too much about shadow, but the shadow is also in there like a reflection of the person's body and soul, but it's different. So the two most important aspects of creating life in the world of One Piece is the combination of a body, living or not, and a soul. I like to think of Law's fruit as the ultimate fruit which can manipulate the body, and Big Mom's fruit as the ultimate fruit that can manipulate the soul. But this is kind of simplified because I think of Law's perennial youth surgery. And so, again, this is important. Big Mom takes lifespan or soul from people. The names mean exactly the same thing. You take 40 years from Pedro's life in the form of a piece of his soul. Give it to a thing, and the thing then lives for, we presume, however much lifespan that Big Mom took. So again, this is a theory, it isn't confirmed, but with Law's perennial youth surgery, rather than making someone immortal, I have for a long time believed that it works because it kills the Law, or the person who has the Opi Opi no Mi, in order to use the ability. It's basically like removing your own soul, your own remaining lifespan, and giving it to someone else. So it is not perpetual youth or perennial youth, it's more like double life. So if Law did the perennial youth surgery on Luffy, if Luffy was literally minutes or hours away from dying, then his lifespan would be increased by Law's remaining lifespan, and Law would die. I've always enjoyed this conversation as well, and the nuance that it gives to Law's fruit, because then it kind of puts Law's fruit on an even higher tier than Big Mom's. Whereas Law isn't the ultimate fruit that can manipulate the body, it's like the ultimate fruit that can do a lot of things. Really justifying why the world government puts such a high value on it. And it would be fitting for a fruit that's considered to be the ultimate doctor fruit to not only be able to heal wounds of the body, but maybe even wounds of the soul too. That's pretty deep. Relating to the components that create life most, the body and soul. Bear in mind, it doesn't have to work that way. If you want to continue with the thought that Law can manipulate the body in any which way, we don't know how Big Mom is invulnerable, right? Maybe it has something to do with her body. So if it has something to do with her body, then it would make sense for his awakening to be able to influence and manipulate that in some way. And that's pretty much what he says, right? Kroom influences your body in other ways. If you can't tell, I'm kind of going all over the place because we need an explanation, man. I need to know. I think probably the cleanest answer that we could have for Law's awakening is basically this. Big Mom has become Law's room. And the effects and abilities that Law has access to with Big Mom being his room is more than normal. At the very least, this thought makes a lot of sense because the other awakening that's revealed in this chapter is much clearer, where Kid makes Big Mom a magnet. It's almost as if he transferred his Devil Fruit ability to Big Mom and pressed the on switch, which was just really cool. I don't think that there's a whole lot of discussion here, but I can really see how destructive this could be. It reminds me a lot, actually, of the ability Blackbeard showed, Black Hole, when he fought Ace. But for me, I kind of define Kid's awakening as a huge offensive trump card. That appears to be what it is. But unfortunately, it really seems to me that the only reason that it's effective at all against Big Mom is because of Law. So Law's pulling more weight here. I still want to see Kid shine. This, to me, is Law's shine, not Kid. I want more from Kid. But I suppose outside of the hype of Awakening, the bigger question is does this change the trajectory of the Big Mom fight? Right? I mean, after a couple chapters ago, it's like, okay, well, Big Mom you still don't have a plan to actually be able to hurt her. And then immediately this chapter, it's like, oh, okay, the conversation has changed. Awakening, Law's probably made her vulnerable. It's possible for them to win. So will they? I still don't think that it's going to happen. Well, I do think that Big Mom is going down, but it's going to be more complicated than simply Kid and Law just defeat her. But Oda's not going to make it easy. I will say this until the very end. I don't think that Big Mom can be defeated and removed from the story until the plot threads from Whole Cake Island that Oda left are resolved. And most of these are related to Big Mom and her past, what it is that she does not know about herself, and her relationship with her family, Lola, Pudding, etc. I think people are starting to come around to the idea that, hey, this is where Big Mom's story it might end, rather than Elbaf. And so that being the case, we might still have a lot of story left in Wano. And I think that people are starting to feel that, which had been my mindset for a while, but it's nice to see. But it also, I think it requires a reminder of patience. Remember, Big Mom's children are still not here, and guys, I promise you, they're going to show up. What role that will be, we'll see, but they will. And regardless of whether the Alliance defeats Big Mom and Kaido, it's pretty much implied that immediately after that, there will still be more content because there's more drama in store after that, even if Luffy wins. Yeah, I'm going to get absolutely roasted for it. I already know it, but straight up, guys, this was a 10 out of 10 chapter for me. Even the Kinemon stuff, it was hilarious. Obviously, there's reasons why I still have hope that what I want to happen will happen, which helps. But yeah, this was just an awesome chapter. I would say what's most special about this chapter is it really makes me feel excited for what happens next. There's other chapters that I enjoy, like a fight chapter between Jinbei and Who's Who. That's probably a bad example, but some of those fight chapters where I enjoy the chapter, but it's sort of self-contained. And so your feelings about where it's going is the same before and after you read it, whether or not you enjoy it. This chapter for me was all about, I cannot wait to see the conclusion of this. That's how I feel. But as always, guys, I'm curious as to what you think, whether or not you noticed something from the chapter that I might have missed. Just share your thoughts. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content, and as always guys, have a wonderful day.